Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Great. Awesome. My name is Jason Oriana. I'm the Community Risk Reduction Specialist for the Cape Coral Fire Department. My job, as it says, is to reduce risk in our community. So this is one of those small aspects that we work on, and that's our hurricane preparedness. We'll talk more about that when we get into that, but I'm going to also introduce Caroline, so I'll let her introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Caroline Brands, as Jason mentioned. I'm an emergency management coordinator, so very similar to him. My job title says it all. I help manage emergencies. So we're very excited to be here today and hopefully get to help prepare you guys a little bit more for the upcoming hurricane season. So thank you again for having us.
All right, so we'll start off by introducing, we have our Cape Coral Ready program. Our Cape Coral Ready program is obviously, as it states, to prepare our residents here in the community for any type of emergency we may face. But today's focus obviously is going to be hurricanes for us because we're going to be getting into that season in just a few months here. Of course, I passed around our brand new hurricane guide. So that's going to be the permanent information for you for all Cape Coral specific stuff, all right? So everything in there going from preparing your pets, your whole family, your communication plans, anything that has to do with debris removal, all that information is in there. Also signing up for alerts is going to be very, very important because you need to make sure you're receiving important alerts that are going to be coming out from the city. So just to introduce the entire team that works behind this whole thing, we have Alvin, who is our division manager within emergency management. We have Misha Jackson, who's one of our emergency management coordinators. Of course, Caroline is here. We have Nicole, who's also an emergency management coordinator, and then myself, I'm the only community risk reduction specialist as of right now. As we continue to expand, obviously, our offices expand because we have more to serve in our community. So just as we expand firefighters, we also expand other divisions of the fire department because we have much more people to serve constantly. So this team will continue to grow. Of course, the biggest piece of this is building a resilient community. When we look at the definition of resilience, we look at the capacity of a person to maintain their core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. The ability to not only overcome setbacks, but to also move forward. So, of course, we saw that very much after Hurricane Ian, how much our community came together to kind of get back to where we're hoping to be. And so as we continue to evolve and we continue to prevent and to mitigate different types of emergencies, we don't do that by ourselves, we do this together, right? That's how we build a resilient community. So, of course, the role of emergency management, we have the 5 phases of emergency management. We look to prevent, to mitigate, to prepare, to respond, and to recover. A lot of people don't know this, but anytime we have some type of disaster, again, we use Hurricane Ian as the example, it takes years to recover, right? We have immediate recovery, which is right after the storm, and then we have long-term recovery. Long-term recovery takes over 10 years, 15 years. It's a very, very long process. That's not only for the community to rebuild, but that's also for the community to also request reimbursements from the federal government for everything that we put together to make sure that we take care of the people within our community. So these processes are very, very long, but we do this behind the scenes because we want the community to focus on preparing for something else that may happen in the future. So, of course, the promotion of a resilient community is at our forefront. We plan for all hazards. What that means is that we plan for any type of emergency, no matter what it is. We don't just talk about hurricanes. We talk about active shooter scenarios. We talk about thunderstorms, just our everyday floods that we may have from heavy rain, right? We talk about extreme heat, right, and drought. All those things that we're planning for, and much more. We'll go in depth into what those are in a little bit. And of course, our goal is to stand by you all. Our whole motto is that, and this is a national thing, disasters start and end locally. They happen here, and then we recover from here, okay? It doesn't go anywhere else. We get state partners and federal partners that they come in right after the disaster starts, but then they leave eventually, right? We end here, we start here.
And so to help build upon our all hazards preparedness, we want to make sure that everybody is involved. So we recently came up with the Cape Coral Ready Initiative. This is the city's all hazards preparedness program designed to educate and inform our residents on resiliency and preparedness. And like Jason said, we are going to use Hurricane Ian as an example because probably a lot of us were here for it. But it goes so much more beyond that, like he said, including tornadoes and both human-caused and nature-based emergencies and accidents. But we're excited to get you guys involved and get you onto this campaign of preparedness. So just a quick picture. This is our building. So we do work for the fire department, but we actually serve the entire city. So when you see a fire station, you know that fire station is serving that specific area. We work out of our admin building or our headquarters, and it doubles as our emergency operations center. So that is where we work out of, and we serve, once again, the entire city. So during Hurricane Ian, and really any other incident that we've had, this is where we report to. And as you can see, just kind of looking at some of the mitigation factors that this building has, it is centrally located to the city. So it's going to be right next to City Hall and the police department. But then also there's very, very minimal. Take a drive. Do you want to switch to this one?
Yeah.
I guess we can go home now.
Yeah, we'll do a quick switch. So some of the mitigation factors of this building itself, there's very minimal exterior windows, so we don't really have to worry too much about that. And then this building is also raised, so you can see the steps and the ramp going up, and then that grassy area also serves as a retention pond for us. So we actually got a beautiful lakefront property during the storm, but that actually helped protect our building, and we were able to operate there and continue without any issues. Another thing about Florida disasters, how many native Floridians do we have in the room with us today? It's okay, we aren't native either, but very few. And so I think it's very important to note that Florida is home to over 21.22 million people, which is a ton, right? And the Sunshine State has declared over 135 major disasters between 1953 and 2019. Since 2019, I believe we have had a major disaster every year since then, in addition to a couple more. As Jason emphasized, all disasters end and begin locally. And then in terms of how many people we serve, did anybody know that the Cape Coral Metropolitan Statistical Area is within the top 100? We are a growing community, and we're expected, well, they always say, we're expected to double in size within the next 10 years. They've said that for the last 10 years. They're going to say that for the next 10 years, but we're expected to grow to about 400,000 people. So we're a growing community, and we want to make sure that we're, as a government agency too, that we're growing to help educate and prepare all of our residents, both current and hopefully future as well. And then just to add to this, so we do have approximately 200,000 residents. I think one of the newest data comes out to be closer to about 210, maybe a little bit over that. So we do have several residents within our city limits. And then some of our barriers, we do have 400 miles of canalways. So they are absolutely gorgeous during the daytime on a beautiful sunny day. But that does kind of add a little bit of a hindrance to us because, when you're driving down a street and then a canal just stops you and you got to drive 10 minutes out of the way. So that is always interesting. And I love the fun fact that we actually have more canals than Venice, Italy. No gondolas here, though. And then just most recently is the mostly accessible by bridge. So we are a peninsula, and that does limit some of our ingress and egress to the city. So when we'll talk a little bit more about evacuation, we'll talk about how that impacts it. But we do have 2 large bridges coming into us. Thank you.
All right, so when we talk about the all hazards approach, we kind of look at, these are some of the hazards that we focus on. And one of those being extreme heat. I apologize, my PowerPoint got messed up, but I'll tell you what these mean, okay? Extreme heat is one of the big ones that we focus on because obviously, especially during the spring and early summertime, we see a lot of dry weather. Obviously, the weather's been very weird lately, and we've been having rain, but you know what? We need the water, so I'm not mad about it. But we do focus on that because there are years and times where we do have extensive periods of drought, where that becomes concerning for us. We talk about dry weather's not good for brush fires. We also talk about half the city right now is is not under the UEP, right? So we have to think about how we have water protection for house fires, for brush fires, for different things like that. A lot of the times, if you see purple hydrants, that means we're pulling from canals, we're pulling from different bodies of water, right? Your red fire hydrants or yellow fire hydrants are the ones that then we're pulling from the actual city water. So in times like that, it can be very, very concerning because we need to make sure we have water for fire protection. Tornadoes is another one that we've seen affect the city before, usually a lot smaller in terms of its scale, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect the community, right? So those are things that we will plan for as well. Extreme days of drought, flood surge, storm surge, different things like that. We plan for stuff like that. Wildfires, thunderstorms, hurricanes, public health and environmental emergencies. So that goes from your pandemics for medical issues such as COVID and stuff like that. We plan for that, but we also plan for environmental stuff such as your red tide, your blue-green algae, different emergencies like that. So those are the natural ones. Then we look at the human-caused ones. So we looked at active assailants or active threats. So that's your active shooters, any situations like that. We're working around the clock for stuff like that. And even cyber threats. A lot of times we don't seem to think about it, but cyber threats are a very real thing. We plan for emergencies like that and make sure that we are protecting the city because that then protects you, right? We want to make sure that we are always on the forefront of planning for cyber threats to our community. So those are the threats and hazards that we look at. So I hope that in your head you're asking, how do I prepare? Well, it's simple. Okay, but it takes some time. Number one thing I need you to have is have a plan. Okay, have a family communications plan. If it's just yourself, have a plan with you and someone else you may know in a different area. Very, very important that you outline who you plan to communicate. You outline if it were something as small as a fire in your house, where are you going to meet outside? But if it's something like a large-scale emergency, where do you plan to evacuate to? Different things like that. We also emphasize that the first 72 is on you. That means the first 72 hours, you should have enough food and water for each individual person and pet within your home, okay? Don't forget about the four-legged friends. And then we also want to make sure that you prepare your whole family, even your pets, okay? So food and water for your pets, but also we'll get into a slide that talks about that, what you need to know that if you did have to go to a shelter, what you need to bring. Very, very important that you know what you need to bring. And that information for pets is also going to be in that guide. And then the other thing is to protect your home, whether that's putting up your shutters, whether that's removing any debris that could fly or become a projectile, anything like that to protect your home so that when you come back you can begin either the rebuild or just cleaning up. Very, very important that you do that. So when we talk about the first 72 is on you, we're talking non-perishable foods, we're talking water, we're talking flashlights, portable radios, phone chargers, first aid kits, personal hygiene items, and any important documents you need to have. You should always carry those important documents with you. Don't leave them behind because they may get destroyed, right? So we want to make sure you remember that. The other part is staying informed, and I'll hit this from a couple different angles because as we saw during Ian, this could have proved to be the worst one we'd ever gotten. So the very first way is if you follow the city's social media, anytime there's an emergency, that's where we're posting all the important information you need to know. But on top of that, another important one I want to highlight is Alertly. Anybody not signed up for Alertly?
We'll get you signed up.
Yes. So very, very important that you sign up for Alertly. I know phone alerts can get annoying. Message fatigue is a real thing. We try and prevent that as much as possible, but we also do recognize that if we're going to have important information that you need to know, we're going to send it out. So that's going to be how we send out text messages, phone calls to you, or we may even be able to send it if there's no communication through what we call WIA and iPause. The other part, radio, tried and true, always works if you have batteries, all right? So we have gone into a partnership with Beasley Media Group. If you didn't know, Beasley Media Group owns 96 Rock. B1039, and then Sunny 1063. So those three stations during or after any type of disaster, if we lose all types of communication, we will tune into these stations and provide the information specific to Cape Coral. Prior to a storm, we will announce what times of the day we will do that, because obviously we don't expect you to sit by the radio 24 hours. We will notify individuals of what times during the day we will be providing the same information for our residents. In terms of protecting your home, we want you to remember that you need to make sure you look at your insurance. You need to make sure you look at flood insurance if you're required to have it, and even if you're not required to have it, it is a good thing to have. You also need to make sure you're trimming your trees, cleaning up any debris. Again, we want to make sure that all those loose tree trimmings and all that stuff gets collected ahead of time. And we want to make sure you inspect your roof. Have a good inspection of your roof prior to any type of, if you do it once a year, that'd be great. Know the status of your roof, because then after, once something happens, that you know where your roof was, and you can then start to file claims and stuff like that. In terms of our family communications plan, I want you to remember that you need to identify meetup locations, okay? Now, I'm not just saying, we talk about house fires and meeting up right outside near the mailbox or something like that, but the meetup locations could also be a city landmark or anything like that. If you have friends or family members who live somewhere else in the city, if you say, oh, if we lose communication, let's meet at City Hall. We meet there at this time, whatever, after something happens, that way we know where to find each other, right? If you have a local park that you all go to, you can say that, right? That's how you check up on people, your friends, your family members, okay? It's also important to appoint an out-of-town contact. We saw this a lot during Hurricane Ian, that it proved to work, was that people were somehow able to get calls or some type of communication out of the state, but not locally. And so what that was doing is that we had a lot of people who were telling us, I was calling my cousin, my sister, my brother, my parents in another state, and they were relaying that information that I'm good, I'm safe, to other people within Cape that couldn't get in contact with me. So very, very important you assign someone who's out of state, or even if it's out of the area, someone you can try and contact to relay information that you're okay. It could also be that your friends and family on Facebook can't get a hold of you, but you got a hold of one person and they can post for you on Facebook and say, I spoke to so-and-so, they're good. All right, no need to worry. Plan to receive weather updates. Very, very important that we pay attention to what the weather is telling us. It is always rapidly changing, so we always want you to plan. I hate to say plan for the worst, but plan for the worst, right? You need to start thinking about those things, because then you find yourselves in situations where you're too late, okay? So that's why you need to prepare ahead of time. Very, very important that when we look at hurricanes coming and we're looking at the cone of uncertainty, right? We look at that cone. If you didn't know, but during Ian, Cape Coral was always inside of the cone, okay? Cape Coral was never outside of the cone. It just so happens that the storm was looking to go one way and shifted to all the way to the other end of the cone, which is where we were. So very, very important, don't look at the track of the storm, look at the cone. We were always within the cone. So very, very important that we continue to prepare that.
And to add to that with the cone, impacts still happen outside of the cone. So there were neighboring areas and neighboring jurisdictions that still experienced, severe storms, things like that, and maybe potential flooding that weren't even in the cone. So it's always good to be hyper vigilant. And like Jason said, we want to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. When we look at preparing the whole family, anybody have some pets in here? Anybody pet owners? Yeah. So we want to make sure that we're preparing for our pets included. So as Jason already mentioned, the food and water, of course, is the first things that we go to, right? But we also want to talk about any potential medications that they might need. And then our personal favorite would be the disposal of if they had to use the restroom. So making sure we have that as well. Something also important is that any time that there is a disaster, oftentimes our emotions are heightened, right? The same thing's going to happen for pets. So it's good to be able to familiarize them with a leash and a collar beforehand. Even if they are off-leash pets, that's perfectly fine, but familiarize them in the case you have to evacuate and they do have to be leashed. And the same thing goes for a crate. If you have a crate, please try to familiarize your pet with them should you have to evacuate and be in that situation. All Shelters are pet friendly, but of course, when we get to that, we'll talk about why we actually want to avoid the shelters. But in the event that you don't have a crate, the Cape Coral Animal Shelter is a fabulous resource, and they actually provide them out free of charge in a disaster if they have them available. So know your evacuation zone. This is actually something that we work with the county on, and they assist with identifying the zones. But you can actually go online, and this information is also in the guide as well, and you can find out exactly where you are or where your loved ones are in terms of your evacuation zone. So it's something very important to note that if we're looking at the city of Cape Coral, we see a lot of red and orange, right? So a question that we get all the time is, how come I don't have, or how come the city of Cape Coral doesn't have more shelters? Well, we don't want to put you guys at risk by putting you in a place that is red and orange if it's going to be a disaster that potentially has storm flooding. And so this is where we look at, and it's very important when we talk about evacuation that yes, the county does actually they release and they advise those recommendations or those requirements. However, you know yourself and your family best. So if you want to evacuate beforehand, we empower you to do so. Or if you think, okay, I have a big family, maybe we should start planning in just a couple of days in advance. The county hasn't said anything, but I think I'm going to prepare a little bit early. That is perfectly okay. You know what is best for yourself and your family. And when we talk about evacuation, a lot of times people say, oh, I went up to Georgia, or I drove up to Tennessee, which might be great. However, depending on what the incident is, it might be fine to just go to your friend's house, your cousin's house in Lehigh, right? They might have a newer build house that is strong and up to code, but then also is not on the waterfront and is not in a flood zone area. So depending on what's going on, it's good to have to be social and have friends in different areas. And when we talk about evacuating, it doesn't necessarily have to be out of the state. It could be local as well.
If you're curious, you guys are right here. So it's all red, okay? So this is why very, very important. Obviously, Sandoval is a very new community, so a lot of the homes are obviously on the newer building code. So I'm sure even though you felt effects from the hurricane, it doesn't necessarily mean, there were probably areas right outside of you that felt it much worse. So we saw after Hurricane Ian that building codes after the 80s really improved tremendously, because you could see a house that was completely leveled and right next to it a house that looked untouched. And because you saw one was built in the 60s and 70s versus the other one was built in the 2000s, okay? But just so you know, this is why we prepare you, because you're in that zone. All right, when we talk about sheltering, sheltering is a county function. We like to outline that because we want to make sure that anytime you advocate for anything shelter-wise, we tell you to go to the county because they are responsible for this, all right? However, here's what we do tell you. Shelters are a lifeboat. They're not a cruise ship, all right? Our only shelter here in Cape Coral is Island Coast High School, which is in the complete northeast, okay? So, very, very important. This is all that a shelter is, all right? We want to be here doing the conga and all those things, but we don't get that luxury during emergencies. So very, very important that you think about that. That's why we emphasize I always tell people, do not wait for an evacuation order, all right? Don't wait for it. They come because they're of a last resort. Make that decision 2 days before, 3 days before a storm, earlier if you can, all right? Don't wait for us. You make that personal decision. That's up to you and what you feel is going to be for your safety. If you can't get out, do it, all right? We like to also mention, if you see, this is all Pine Island Matlacha, okay? They're all red. So what happens during an evacuation? Where are they going? Into Cape Coral. That's their only option, okay? So if we can try and get you out sooner, that means you don't have to worry about this boggling down the one road in and the one road out, all right? So think about that. All right, so really quick, I want to touch about the difference between 911 and 311, all right? So your 911 obviously is for your emergencies, all right? We're talking about crimes in progress, immediate threats to life and bodily injury, any major property damage, either due to a crime or to a fire or anything like that, right? If you're reporting a fire or hazardous material, or to initiate a rescue of a person who may be trapped or in danger, okay? That's your 911, right? If you are just wanting to do a wellness check on someone that you just haven't heard from or anything like that, that's when you call 311. Now, 311 day to day is the city's line for anything that has to do with city government, for city operations, anything like that. You have questions about Waste Pro, you can call 311. You have questions about utilities, you can call 311. You have questions about anything like that, you call 311. But during emergencies, this is also 311 you can call, because you can say, hey, I missed the evacuation order. What zone did they call, right? And they can tell you that information. Hey, I don't know what zone I'm in. Obviously, I just told you guys are in A, but I don't know what zone I'm in. Can you tell me? You give them your address, they'll tell you what zone you're in, right? You can also ask about any permitting questions, hurricane debris, waste pickup, FEMA recovery updates. Anytime that we have major disasters, for example, after Ian, people could call 311 and say, hey, where do I go to sign up for any of the FEMA programs or anything like that? They'll give you those locations, and et cetera. You can also call in wellness checks one of two ways. You can call in a wellness check to 311, or you can call the non-emergency line for police and fire, which that phone number is here. But this same page here is in that hurricane guide, okay, with those phone numbers and that information. All right, watch versus warning, okay? We usually compare it to tacos or cupcakes. We can say that we have the ingredients for our tacos, or we have the ingredients to make cupcakes, right? That's gonna be our watch, meaning be ready. The conditions are favorable for severe weather. So the important thing is just to prepare your home, your plans, your evacuation kits, anything like that. And then when we actually cook the tacos, when we actually bake the cupcakes, then we have our warning. That's your taking action. That is when you know that severe weather is imminent. Okay, I'm talking, if we're talking in terms of Ian, about a day or two before, we knew it was coming, all right? So those are the times where you know it's time to get out. Of course, we talk about preparedness being everybody's responsibility, not just for you all, but also for our government agencies and partners as well. So of course, we're the fire department in the city. We do have our CERT program, which is a great program to learn about disasters and assisting afterward. Of course, FEMA, the Florida Division of Emergency Management, and Lee County as well. We work very closely with all of these partners because we want to make sure that we're getting you the best information possible. Now, we talk about neighborhood preparedness, right, and thinking about the community. Obviously, today we engaged in that neighborhood preparedness. But it's important that anybody who didn't join us today, if you see them out and about, you tell them about today's program. You tell them they need to get this hurricane guide. They need to get the information to make sure that they're also being prepared, all right? So again, it's everybody's responsibility to continue educating. But of course, we also emphasize educating in schools, places of worships, and even online. If anybody's interested in getting involved anytime before, during, or after a disaster, of course, within the fire department, we have our community services program. One component of the community services program is the CERT program, which is the Community Emergency Response Team program. That is where you go through a series of trainings, and then before, during, and after a disaster, you assist us with either presenting something like this, or it could be after a disaster that you're assisting in the operations and logistics of everything that's going on. So you go through training for that. Another great partner you can talk to is the American Red Cross, of course. They always have volunteers that go out and assist with feeding and making sure that people are receiving access to social services. And then there's also Team Rubicon. If you're handy with a chainsaw or anything like that, that's a great place to participate in. But they go out and assist people with tarping roofs, any minor debris clearing, different things like that. So they're also a very great partner with us. That concludes today's presentation. We're going to be taking questions. This is just a QR code for the digital version of the guide, but of course you have a copy of it. Anybody have any questions I can answer today? Gotcha. There's no real data on that. We are actually in pursuits of doing a study to see what that would look like for us, because we've never had it. I want to say we've never had it, but we just don't have the data to back anything up right now. We just know that there would be an issue possibly, but we've never actually done a full study to contain data. So I can't really answer that question for you, but the only issue is that that's why we are emphasizing to people that they need to evacuate when they feel it's necessary, and hopefully that is ahead of time and not waiting for the last minute. Sure. Sure.
What are the plans going for the future, and should they be in process right now to be able to build that before it happens?
Yeah, right now we continue to apply and look for different grants and stuff to improve the infrastructure in the city. Because it's not typically my job to work on the roads and stuff like that, I couldn't answer that question 100% for you. I will emphasize that we advocate very heavily for the improvement of infrastructure and roads as well. But just so you are aware, Pine Island, Del Prado, Veterans Parkway, I think that's it, right? And Cape Coral Parkway and Burnt Store, we technically don't own those roads, okay? Those are county and state roads, all right? So they are responsible for maintaining and improving those. However, our mayor and the council and all the people who work at City Hall, the city manager and the fire chief, we continue to advocate, apply for grants, do all these different things to improve those and to get those people to actually act and improve those roads for us. That's something that they do every single day. We just can't move the needle ourselves. It has to be a group effort in that.
The last question on that point is, going around Cape Coral, other communities, we can see that the growth is going on as far as large apartment buildings and building up the infrastructure. Don't you think it's a little bit not safe if we can't handle the evacuation and nobody's looking at, okay, let's just build and we'll worry about people later?
Again, that's why my thing for you is to make sure that you prepare yourself to make sure that if you know that something is coming, you get out sooner than everybody else, right? That you make that personal responsibility decision. You know, I'm not trying to say don't worry about anybody else, but the important part is your safety, and that's why we go around and we educate everybody to worry about their safety. That way everybody makes those important decisions to get out before it gets bad.
If I can, real quick.
Yeah.
To add to that as well, in regards to the evacuation study, even when we do complete that, because that is something that's in the works with our Public Works Department as well as county partners and other folks as well, I believe DOT as well. There's other factors that also contribute to that. So for example, during Ian, we saw 75 actually got closed because of the flooding, right? So even if we can get to a T how long it takes to get our residents out of the city, there might also be some external factors that we might not be able to consider, which then supports the potentially leaving early if that's the best decision for you. Yes, sir.
During Hurricane Irma, a lot of people went north, they got out of town. When the flooding didn't occur like we thought it was going to be, 12, 15 feet surge. When Hurricane Ian came along, a lot of people, like idiots like me, stayed in their house. For 12 hours with the storm. What kind of difference did that make in deaths?
So we don't directly deal with the deaths, but in terms of the difference, I think, as I say, if you want to talk to the public safety side afterwards, I think in the messaging, it's very important. So you talked a little bit about messaging fatigue earlier, right? We said during Irma, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then it didn't happen. So then the next time there was a disaster, we said, again, this is going to happen, this might happen, this is going to happen. People didn't believe it because historically, maybe it didn't happen to us, right? It happened somewhere, but not to us. And from the information and educational side, which I know is only a component of your question, but it happens after every disaster, is that when we see something that we advocate for, that we thought was going to happen and it doesn't happen, people burn out and then they don't want to listen or they don't think it's going to happen again. And so then after things like Hurricane Ian, then we get people that are super vigilant, that want to prepare and want to listen, and we're hoping that this stays. But the reality is that within probably about 5 to 10 years, other people, people are going to make those same mistakes again and say, okay, well, it hasn't happened. We haven't had a major storm in 10 years. I built my house up, I feel pretty good. So just from the messaging side, it's always kind of back and forth. But in terms of public safety and and death. Like I said, we don't deal with that specifically. The National Weather Service did create, they have a public report about this. It's like 85 pages about everything regarding Hurricane Ian and all the areas, not just Lee County, but as well as all of Florida and other areas that were impacted. And one of the components of that report does discuss death. So if that is something that you are interested in, that would be the National Weather Services report.
For the 72 hours on you, really that means we should not rely on calling 911 during that time, right?
It's not that you can't rely on us during that time, because you may have a couple different things happen here. So the first 72 being on you is just making sure that you have food, water, and shelter, right? That's the main focus of it, okay? That doesn't account for emergencies necessarily. During Ian, we did stop emergency service. We stopped emergency services at 45 miles an hour sustained winds, okay? We have a bunch of weather systems within the city, so we get an average mile per hour. So we see the gusts, but we also see the sustained. That's what we're worried about. So we stopped emergency services 8 a.m. that Wednesday, and then we began again 11 p.m. that same day, okay? So it was a very long period of time. We had a lot of calls in waiting that we had to respond to afterward. That can happen. Doesn't mean it will happen all the time, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't call 911. If you have an emergency or anything like that, call 911, because at least we will put you on a priority list. So if it's something that's life or death, you'll be very, very high on that list. But if it's something like, my door flew off or something, you may be a little lower, because obviously we want to make sure we're prioritizing the people who are in immediate danger. But again, keep in mind, those 45-mile-an-hour sustained winds can affect emergency response, and it did. So that can happen.
I've got two questions.
Sure.
I have some friends that live in the North Fort Myers area, and their fire district has helped their association with some below-market acquisition of emergency supplies like generators and other emergency supplies for the community. Does Cape Coral Fire Department support any kind of a program like that?
We don't have a program like that. Need more information?
Yeah, real quick. So we don't specifically for community organizations. However, if you are a nonprofit, which might be something that their business, or I know it's a neighborhood, but if there's say their HOA has a 501c3 or maybe anything like that, nonprofits can apply for grant funding to then pursue things like that. So Jason said earlier, but after a disaster, a lot of grant funding becomes available because we want to make sure we can strengthen our area to, hopefully mitigate those impacts if something were to happen again in the future. So if you are a 501c3, that is something that is more available to you than a normal business.
Second question, also referring to North Fort Myers. I understand that their emergency police fire department supports a program that's voluntary that residents will put a sticker on their house to indicate they've evacuated or are sheltering in place during the storm. Do you have something like that here?
We don't have that, okay? The only reason is because we won't necessarily check every single home, all right? So the example I can give you is after those times that we couldn't respond to any type of emergency, we had over 300 calls in waiting only within those hours that were for us to respond to, all right? And so some of those range from structure fires that were occurring and unfortunately burned down homes, and then all the way down to a pipe burst or something like that, right? So we won't have the opportunity to go door to door. This is where communities are very, very important because you all have the ability to check on each other, all right? So if you want to develop something like that in your community, we can definitely help you with that. We don't personally have that. What we have is if we were to respond to your home, we have stickers that tell us what we're looking for. So if you have pets or if you have children or anything like that, and you can put that in that sticker. So if we were to respond to your home, we walk in knowing what we need to look for.
It's exactly what they have there. It says, someone had evacuated or someone had,
Yeah, in terms.
in case they had a response to emergency at that particular location.
Correct. In terms of the evacuation stickers and stuff like that, we don't have that. Because if we go respond to a home in a 911 call, we go based on what we see in the home. So if we don't see anybody in the home, then we won't report that there's nothing in the home, right? But if we go and because we're told that someone is supposed to be there, we will look for them, and if not, report that as a missing person later.
Does your organization meet with the city agency on a formal basis to express concerns about density?
So,
Because when I look around, there are nothing but multifamily complexes going up, right, left, all over.
yeah. So we don't advocate for, how can I put this? If developers own land and they're going to build, we don't advocate for them not to build. What we advocate for them is to build better, or to make sure that they are putting in preventative and measures to mitigate any type of emergencies in the future. That's what we will advocate for. That's just on the emergency management side. I don't know what Public Works is doing. I don't know what the police department is doing in terms of those high-level conversations. That's not our wheelhouse. Our wheelhouse is that if something is coming to our community, that we're going to figure out how we can prevent any emergency or mitigate any emergency.
But shouldn't evacuation be an integral part of that? What you're saying is that you want them, the builders, to build better. What about getting the people out of here?
Yep, but again, I can't tell the developer that because they're building, it's going to ruin our evacuation, right?
But can't you tell the city people that grant building permits to put a limit on the number of people that might need to be evacuated in the case of a major hurricane?
I couldn't answer that question for you. If you want to chime in, that's great.
Yeah, and these are some of the things that they do consider. Our folks from our community, our development services department, they are the ones that handle all the permits. They're actively involved in both hurricane preparedness and hurricane response. So they are very well versed on the fact of some of the things that we want to, that are important to us and of course to the safety of our community. So I do believe these are things that they factor in. It's just not quite in our specific wheelhouse, but the people that are in those roles, we work very close with. Also in the terms of what we can control, we have so the city has the strategic plan, and then every department has a strategic plan to support that. So we know that growth is going to continue to happen. So what we focus on is making sure that we have easier access of services to our community members. So, for example, the fire department, we're already building additional fire stations, and just about every year we have a plan for another fire station to be on board to, one, make it quicker for us to be able to respond, but then to be able to serve more people in our community. So that's how we kind of work on our strategic approach to being able to serve the population increase.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, you don't know what the evacuation number is, and you don't have a study, so you can't plan for something you have no idea what it is.
Correct, yes, I don't have that specifically. I know Public Works is working on the study. I'm not sure where they're at with that. It was in talks before Ian, but I don't believe that they are the lead. I believe it's a collection of different organizations. I'm not sure where they're at with that, but of course, once we get data from that, it will hopefully help inform the rest of the decisions that we make as well.
But moving forward, a smart plan would be to know what that number is and limit the number of the population growth based on what the evacuation fee, so that people could be safe and not the tax dollars coming in. That's my opinion.
Ken, we don't make those decisions. That if that's a concern you have, I recommend you speak to the city council.
county, too.
And the county, because again, they make those decisions.
Right, but you are in a position of safety for people, and you can also advocate for that.
Yes, but again, if someone builds something, I can't tell them not to build it. That's not up to me. In fact, way above my pay grade. But I can advocate, hold on, but I can advocate for safety measures that we can put or add or advocate for on a county and state level, okay? And we plan for stuff like that, right? But I can't make those decisions myself.
Don't get upset with the person asking the question.
No, I'm not. I'm just letting you know. I'm just letting you know my position and what I can and cannot do. Our job is advocacy, but decisions, we can't always do that.
How high a structure can you safely protect? Fire rescue?
So, I couldn't answer, I can't answer that question specifically for you because we have multiple measures to do that, right? So, We have the Westin here, right, which is the tallest building we have in the city, and we can protect those because we have both measures within the building to protect for fire protection, right, such as sprinklers, different things like that. I mean, to answer a specific question about our ladder trucks go up to 100 feet in the air, so that's another feature. But again, we have different fire department connections within the building. There's fire sprinklers, early notification and activation of those. You know, if we talk about a fire at the Westin, right? We have had them before, and we were able to do that very, very quickly because not only did the fire sprinklers help in those situations, but also the early recognition and notification that there was a fire was able to help us protect the rest of the building. Can I answer your question?
If your house is flooded or about to be flooded, should you shut off the power?
So it's a very great question. Anytime a storm is coming or stuff like that, if you are going to evacuate or anything like that, we always recommend you shut off your main breaker. Very, very important that you do that because if you're not back in your home and power is restored, you could put your house at risk of a fire. The reason that happens is because the surge of the electricity going through the lines at that time is so powerful that it could overload your breakers. So we saw a lot of house fires after the hurricane because the main breaker was still on, so that surge of power caught fire in their breaker panel. So yes, very, very important you shut off your panels, absolutely. Yes, sir?
Gas stations require to have generators?
Gas stations by law are not required to have generators. I know a lot of them are looking into them just because they see that the need, and of course they're a business and they want to remain open. So a lot of them are looking into it, but they're not required by law. We'll do last two questions there.
I'd like to ask if your agency or the city of Cape Coral's agencies work with the state agencies like the Department of Transportation. And when you talk about evacuations, it's been like an 8-year project that they've increased the lanes on Birdstone Road as an evacuation, taking it from 1 lane in, 1 lane out to 2 lanes. But that phased approach is kind of stalled. Is that something that your agencies can speak with the state agencies, considering the density that we have and the growth?
Yeah.
Maybe they should finish that up so we can get evacuation right out.
Yeah, so we have members in our Public Works Department that are constantly advocating for stuff like that. You know, the hard part about those roads is because we don't own them, we can't move the needle like this. But I know that our Public Works Director, even our City Council, are heavily involved in those county and state conversations. I mean, I couldn't tell you the amount of times they meet with our state reps to push that needle to get those roads completed. You know, again, it's one of those things that's very, very difficult when we don't control the road. So that advocacy piece is very, very important to it, and I know that they're engaged in that all the time.
Thank you. Second part of my question is this lady right here.
Yes.
And building upon that and also considering all the developing, you may not be able to answer this, but in terms of advocating for it, I understand there's a lot of call for elimination of mangroves because of the building. Is that, number 1, accurate? And number 2 is, are you in the capacity of being able to advocate for that not happening or,
Yeah, so we have not heard that. Like, that is not a confirmed, I can't say that that's a confirmed thing. We definitely have advocated for making sure that we consider mangroves a natural protection barrier for us. So we definitely do advocate for those natural protections because that's what we have. If we don't have those types of things, we obviously have to rely on building protective measures, which adds costs and stuff like that. So we definitely do advocate for the protection of our natural resources to help mitigate the effects of storm surge and different things like that, yeah.
so are developers required to release that information to city government?
I'm not 100% sure on that. The city definitely advocates for that information for sure. In terms of the requirements, I'm not 100% sure just because I don't work on the permitting side, so I'm not 100% sure on what the requirements are, yeah. In terms of advocacy, we are there for that.
I guess the last thing that just came to mind is we're in the process of developing our own strategic plan. And it would be wonderful to have you look at it and edit for us. Is that something that you could do in terms of emergency preparedness?
Yeah, in terms of looking it over and making suggestions, we'd be more than happy to do that, absolutely.
Could I contact for that?
I can give you my card after this. Yeah. All right, I appreciate everybody's time. I have my card if anybody needs it, and of course, we hope to come back for any other types of presentations. So I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great day.